I had a student who organized a credit union, a co-op bank in Washington Heights, in the Dominican community in New York. And, you know, cheap credit to the immigrant community there, but who's against that? I mean, it's a good thing, right? I mean, it's creating justice, right? It's a good thing. Who'd be against that? Turned out it was a firestorm. Who was against it? Banks didn't care. It was small potatoes for the banks. You know what check cashers are? Huh? Loan sharks. There was a whole industry of people whose power rested on the powerlessness of that community. And the community, by just trying to empower itself, brought a firestorm down. And so then my student had to go find allies in the unions and in churches and with political leaders in order to get law enforcement to come down and take care of the predators that were interfering with the growth of this new life. And it just seems to me that that's often the tenor of change. That conflict is a healthy part of growth and change. And it's kind of where there's life, there's conflict. I mean, there's destructive conflict, there's constructive conflict. It seems to me that the deal is to try to figure out how to make it constructive and not destructive. But to avoid it seems to me to not choose to play in the real world. So I don't know. I don't know if that. I mean, that sort of goes to that second point about how do you separate creating justice from fighting injustice, and to what extent can you really separate them, if that's what you're really trying to do. And so that goes back to the prior question: is what are you really trying to do? Are you really trying to take on a justice question, or is it more of a charitable enterprise? And the distinction I make there is between there's a need, let's try to help meet that immediate need. We're not asking why the need exists. We're not asking what conditions have to be put in place for that need to go away. We're saying, let's meet the need. It's good. And it's a good thing for the need meter, because then you feel good. You're a charitable, good person. It does deal with something in the short run, but it's just creating a permanent dependency. It never moves beyond that, because to move beyond it, you have to ask why. And then once you start asking why, then you discover all these tensions and these conflicts of interest and all this stuff that takes us down a different road. And so that's where I think the question is, what is the problem here that I'm actually trying to address really matters. To the extent that these change efforts rests on mobilizing lots of people, that they're not simply about reconfiguring they're not just like how you spend money, but how you engage people. Dissatisfaction with a problem is not enough to motivate action on it. It takes hope, and hope is critical. But by hope I mean, and I think this will go to your point. I don't mean flowers in May. I mean like, oh yeah, everything's going to be okay. I'm not talking about that kind of hope. Somebody call that hokey hope, and that's not talking about that. But I'm talking about the best definition I heard was by 12th century philosopher Maimonides, who, and it's a little tricky. Listen to this: hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible, as opposed to the necessity of the probable. In other words, to be a realist is to recognize that while it is probable that Goliath will always win, sometimes David does. It was highly improbable that we'd ever elect a black man president of the United States, at least in my lifetime. It happened. That sense of possibility is precious. And whether it comes in our own lives or in other examples, and to me, that's where the imagining of what could be, not in some remote, weird way, but in a way that is actually plausible, becomes really critical in terms of motivating people to engage in the work of challenging, in the work of creating change. So it's not like you can really decouple them in that sense, I think. Yeah. But the space to create that new thing, where does that come from? And how do you create that space? And how do you keep, like in the case of my student, the predators off there so the new thing can flourish and grow? Unless it doesn't challenge anybody, and if it doesn't challenge anybody, then I'm not sure what's going on. if you look at this stuff from a power perspective, then the question is, how do I affect the interest of a person, institution, organization, whose resources I need to solve my problem in such a way that it is less costly for them to cooperate than to resist, or more costly to resist than to cooperate. And so it's not like zero sum. It's not like, it's looking at it almost in cost-benefit terms of like, how do I raise the cost of not cooperating? But I think passive resistance is a big misnomer. I mean, Gandhi called it satyagraha, which means soul force or truth force. And it wasn't conceived of as anything passive at all. It was conceived of as a way to build from the interdependence that things have with each other, and that people have with each other, and institutions have with each other, and recognizing that anything operating always depends on our cooperation to some extent. So he's saying, well, all that means is that potentially we've all got agency. Potentially we can all make a choice. Now, that to me is the beginning of creativity, because if I get that I'm an agent, that I can actually make a choice. There's a wonderful moment in the Gaiety Theatre early in Gandhi's career in South Africa when the British regime imposed restrictions on the Indian community, and there's this big mass meeting about what to do. And Gandhi begins by making everybody angry by sort of provoking how injustice is. And they start saying, oh, yes, we're going to kill a few Englishmen. That's what we're going to do. And somebody says, yeah, I'd die for that. And Gandhi says, I admire that courage, because I too would die for this cause, but there's no cause for which I will kill. And he proceeds to then argue that, well, they can beat me, they can put me in jail, they can have my dead body, but then what will they have? They'll have my dead body, not my obedience. And the moment he says that, you can feel ripple through the room. Oh, not my obedience. Oh, I have a choice here. And that to me is the beginning of creativity. That's the beginning of thinking creatively. How do I use my resources? You know, do I not get on the bus? You know, so it's the birth of a whole series. And if you look at the nonviolent tactics used to bring down Milosevic, or in the first Intifada, or in a lot of, it's enormous creativity every day. Now, there's this recent study of, I think it's 323 movements, either regime change, occupations, or secessions. And it's just published a couple of years ago by two political scientists. They did this whole deep quantitative analysis. And they show that the nonviolent movements are consistently more successful. One reason is that they require mass participation. They require lots of people. Violent movements can get by with a few people. And so I don't know, I think that it is all about creativity in the deepest sense.